Welcome to Byte and Beyond with Uday. In this series, we will cover solid principle. So, the first principle is single responsibility principle. So, what does single responsibility mean? So, if we say what is the single responsibility principle, so its definition is a class should have only one reason to change, or a class should have only one responsibility. It should not have multiple responsibilities. So, if we say in the simple word, so one class is equal to one job is equal to one responsibility, meaning a class should have only one responsibility. So, let's understand what is the meaning of this definition. So, for example, uh, here I have multiple robots, and one robot has one job. Okay, so this robot is handling database, this robot is handling email, and this robot is taking care of the system design. So if we talk about bad example, then let's talk about in terms of classes. So over here we have invoice service class. So if you see invoice service class methods, so you can see multiple methods over here. First one is generate invoice, which is right. Invoice service can have generate invoice method. The second one is save to database. Now, this is not right because invoice service should have, responsibility which is related to invoice only. For example, generate invoice, that is right. Invoice service can have generate invoice method. But when it comes to save to database, that is not right. This part should be this save to database part should belong to another class. For example, repository. The save to database should be responsibility of the repository, not the invoice service. Now, see over here, we can see one more new method, which is send email notification. So this also doesn't sound good. This is not a right design. Invoice service should not have, this method send email notification. Instead of that, this method should be part of the email service. Okay, so let me create one same let me create a similar class in the IDE so you guys can understand what exactly I want to explain. So over here we have invoice service. Okay, so invoice service. Now let me create few methods over here. First one is the generate invoice. So let me create generate invoice. Okay. I am for the sake of the simplicity, I am keeping it simple. So generating noise. Just assume this method contains the appropriate logic to generate an invoice. Now we have one more method which is save to database. Save to database. Okay. Okay. I'm using sysout for the simplicity. Saving invoice to database. So basically, this method is talking with the database and it actually persisting invoice in the database. So which is not right. Our service should not directly uh, talk with the database. It should talk with the repository layer. or the another class who is responsible to talk with the database. So this method is not right. Bad design. I'm adding comment over here. Okay, bad design. And another method is send email notification. So send email notification. Okay, and I'm using this out over here as well, and I'm just saying sending email notification, sending email notification. So if you talk about this method, then now this method is sending email by itself, so which is not right. Invoice service class should have responsibility related to invoice only. So this method should not be a part of this invoice service, which is not right. This method should be part of the email service. Why invoice service is sending this email? Okay, so this is the sign of bad design. Okay, these two methods should not be part of the invoice service because save to data our invoice service should not directly talk with the database. There should be another class who is talking with the database. We can use that class over here, and using that class invoice service can save the invoice in the database. Same goes for the email. Okay, uh, the invoice service should not directly send the email. Instead of that, invoice service should have used email service, which is responsible to send an email. So this is not the right design. Okay, because now our class has multiple responsibility: generating invoice, save it, save invoice to database, then send email notification. So one class have multiple responsibilities. So this is not the good design. This is the sign of bad design. So if we move ahead, here is a simple example in an animated way. Now our class is doing multiple things. It is generating invoice, at the same time it is saving the invoice in the database and sending email notification. So you can see our class is a bit confused. You know, Same, here is the another example. Now mobile has to pretend like refrigerator, washing machine, and the microwave oven. So this is not right. I mean, mobile cannot cannot be a refrigerator or the washing machine or the microwave oven. Mobile can should have only one responsibility, which is related to mobile only. It cannot cool our food, no? It cannot wash our clothes. So too many responsibility meaning chaos. So class should have only one responsibility. This is the definition, and these are a few examples, animated examples, so you guys can understand easily. So if we go next, here is a good example. So we have seen the bad example. So what is the good example? So you can see over here. Now we have three classes. Invoice generator, which is responsible to generate the invoice. Then we have another class, invoice repository, which is basically handling database calls, and it is storing our invoice in the database. Then we have email service, which is responsible to sending an email. Okay. So if I need to implement in my ID, how can I do that? So let's first create invoice generator class. Let's create each class one by one. Let's pick the invoice generator first. So this class is the sign of bad design. Let me comment. So we know that this is the bad design. Is the typo? Let me remove. Okay, great. Now let me create one more class, which is invoice. What was the class name? Invoice generator. Okay, great. Invoice generator. Okay. Now this class can have responsibility to generate an invoice. That is all right. Okay, let me copy this method quickly, just for the simplicity. Instead of typing everything, let me copy paste. Okay. See, now this class has generate invoice responsibility. That is great. Now let me create one more class, which is invoice repository. Invoice repository. Okay, and let me copy one more method. This one. Okay, instead of save to database, let me just say save. Or for the simplicity, let me just keep the name as it is, save to database, so we can understand easily what exactly it is doing. Now we have one more class, which is email service. Let me create that class as well. Email service. Okay, email service. Okay, let me copy this email. I mean this method, and okay, now you can see we have multiple classes over here. Each class has its own responsibility. Invoice generator has responsibility to generate an invoice. Invoice repository has responsibility to save invoice in the database. Now email service has responsibility to send email notification. Now this is the good design. So let me add a comment over here. Good design. Because now each class has its own responsibility. Each class has its own responsibilities. Now none of the class have multiple responsibilities. So now you guys are might wondering that now let's say invoice generator, now we want to save the invoice in the database. So how invoice can save this data, save the invoice in the database? So for that, what we can do, we can simply create an instance variable over here, invoice repository. Okay, invoice repository, and and let me create one more method, save invoice to db. Okay, now what will I do? I will call invoice repository class from here. So if I need to if I want to store invoice in the database, I can simply create one method, and instead of writing all the logic like we used to do earlier, we have written logic to save the invoice in the database in our bad design. Instead of that, what I am doing now, I am using invoice repository class to store my invoice in the database, rather than invoice generator saving the invoice in the database itself. It is now using invoice repository. So this is the correct design. Same goes for the notification. Let me create one more method over here, public void and email. Okay, so for that, similarly, I will create one more instance variable, which is for the email service. Okay, email service. Now instead of writing all the logic to send an email inside the invoice generator, what will I do? I will use the email service, and I will say send email notification. So I am using this this separate classes to to send the email as well as to send the data to save the data to save the invoice in the database. So I'm using different classes over here. So this is the example of the good design. And if I need to test this, what can I do? I can simply create an object of the invoice generator, new invoice generator, okay, and invoice generator. Let's say I want to generate an invoice, and I am calling it generating invoice. Now, if I run this class, it will print generating invoice. That is correct. Now, if I want to save this invoice in the database, what will I do? I will simply call save invoice to DB. Okay. So saving invoice to database. Same goes for the notification. I will I will say over here send email. So now we are sending the email notification. So even though invoice generator have only one responsibility, but we can use other classes who are responsible for other functionalities. So in our case, invoice generator is responsible to generate an invoice. Invoice repository is basically responsible to save invoice in the database, and email service is responsible to send email notification. Now, if invoice generator want to use uh, if invoice generator want to save its invoice in the database, invoice generator simply invoice generator can simply use the invoice repository class. So over here we are using invoice repository to save the invoice in the database. Similarly, if we want to send notification from the invoice generator, we can use the email service. So over here we are simply using the email service. So now now this invoice generator class have only one responsibility, only one reason to change, and it has only one responsibility because because to save invoice in the database, it is part of the invoice repository, and the send email notification is a part of the email service. So now invoice generator has only one responsibility, and it has only one reason to change. Okay. So if we switch back to our PPT, so over here we have achieved one class is equal to one responsibility. So in our case, it is true. We have created three classes: the generator, the repository, and the email service. Now each have its own responsibility. Okay, and if we go next, now we have created. We have achieved the single responsibility principle. We have correctly implemented single responsibility principle. So why does this matter? Why we are doing this? Because it is easier to maintain. So what does it mean? Easier to maintain. So once you create a feature, it goes into the production, and customers or user use your application. Now, for some reason, let's say few functionality is not working. Okay, so let's say my invoice generator is having some issue. So in that case, it is easier to maintain. I mean, I can simply go to the invoice generator class and I can fix this method. Okay, now assume that we have implemented the bad design. So in our case, we have multiple methods over here: save to database, send email notification, and generate invoice. And now some issue is uh, some issue is raised by the customer that generate invoice is not working properly. So we are fixing this method. Okay, that is right. But now let's say customer has raised one more issue that I'm unable to save invoice in the database. So still I'm fixing this method. And now let's say if I need to add some new functionality in the future. Now I want to save my database into the save my invoice in the MySQL database. Earlier I used to save in the Postgres. So still I need to update this method. So now this class has multiple reasons to change, which is not right. Which can if you change your classes unnecessarily, you might ending up creating a new bugs in your application. So for that, for the clean design, we should always we should always follow single responsibility principle. So one class should have only one responsibility. So if we need to create something new, we can easily, expand our application. We can easily extend new feature, or we can easily create new feature. And if new developers comes, it is easier for the developer to understand what exactly is going on in our application. So that is why we follow this single responsibility principle, and this fulfills the easier to maintain point. Then easier to test. Now, similar example. I mean, if we are following the single responsibility principle, so it is easier to test. To generate the invoice, I just need to test the invoice generator class. And for save to database functionality, I just need to, test the invoice repository class. So it is easier to scale, test. And yeah, the easier to scale meaning, let's say I need to add new feature related to save to database. Now I want to update as well. So instead of, adding the method inside our invoice service, now instead of save to database, we will also write uh, update to database. So which is not right. I mean, it is not. It is hard to scale. Now we are adding multiple things in the same classes, and it will create more bugs, and it is hard to maintain. So that is why if we follow the single responsibility principle, just like we did over here, it is easier to scale and better team collaboration. It is easier to understand, and other team can also understand that yes, for generate invoice we need to use the invoice generator. For persist to persist the invoice in the database, we need to use invoice repository. So it is a better team collaboration basically. For other developers can easily understand which class is responsible for what. Okay. So here is the good example. If we follow the single responsibility principle, so if we follow the SRP, then our life will be easy. We know what we are fixing. We don't have multiple things at the same place. We know we need to fix only that part only. Yes, because that part is not working. So here is the example of the if we are not following the single responsibility principle. So we have we have mixed up everything, and now we are confused that if that part is not working, if ABC part is not working, where I need to fix. I have multiple wires is going on. Which wire is related for what? I don't know. So this guy is pretty confused because he did not follow the single responsibility principle, so his life is hard, and this guy has followed the single responsibility principle, so his life is easy. So yeah, this is the um, example. So summary, here's a quick summary. Nothing much in the summary, but here is the short form of the single responsibilities principle. So SRP keeps your architecture clean, that is correct. Each class should have only one reason to change. Yeah, that is also correct, because if generator is not working, Our generator has only one reason to change. I mean, if invoice generation is not working, we know that yes, it is part of invoice generator. So now each class has, only one reason to change. And then, crucial for Spring Boot. Yes, if you are using Spring Boot, then Spring Boot already, follow this architecture. So if you have developed the Spring Boot application, it has three layers: the controller layer, which intercept the REST calls. Then we have service layer, where we return our business logic. Then we have repository layer, where the repository layer basically talks with the database. So Spring Boot itself, promotes the clean architecture, and it basically uses the single responsibility principle. So see, controller calling service, service calling repo. Intercept this part, intercept APIs. Over here we write business logic, and this guy repository talks with the database. So yeah, that is it. Let me know if you have any question or queries. If you like this topic, then please like, share, comment, and subscribe. Thanks for watching. See you in the next part.